Unfinished business, do we have any? No unfinished business, no new business.
I don't know if it's even one, but we're going to talk about something. I want to revisit the issue with busing and the one address drop-off situation with kids, and to make sure that I understand the process and so it's my understanding that starting next year, the parents are being informed that they can only have one drop-off address, which is, I would assume, their primary address for a student. I'm looking back here, Kevin, even more.
Does not have to be their primary. We are working with parents to identify an address that we can pick up and drop off.
So if that address happens to be grandparent, does then all other things associated with that student then tie into that address rather than?
No, so we have been working within the routing system and within our student information system database to identify a field that we can put as the primary address, which wouldn't change. That would be the primary home address for the student, where the student resides, but also a field for transportation address. So nothing would change in communicating with the home, sending things home, that type of stuff. That'd be the primary, but we would also have a transport bus riders who would have a transportation address if that differed from the primary home address.
So, for example, if my children catch the bus at my house in the morning, they can't be dropped off at their grandparents' afternoon.
We're not saying no. What we're saying is that we want to individualize those discussions, because right now we are having several situations across the county, more than several, where we have requests that spring up to our bus drivers. Tuesday and Thursday I need them dropped off over here, and Monday and Wednesday and Monday and Friday I need them dropped off over here, and we can't accommodate that safely. We're working with those situations right now. But what we've stated is that if the primary address is not going to be used for transportation and there needs to be an alternate address for transportation, we need to work with those parents starting this spring, going into the summer, so that we can start routing that so that we don't have confusion starting out the school year. That's why we're floating that idea and communicating that early.
Okay, so because I think maybe when this was originally rolled out, there was not going to be an alternative address, correct? Was there always going to be an alternative address?
We basically were saying one address. We need parents. So let's take a common situation that we're dealing with. Unfortunately, two parents get a divorce. There's a custody an agreement. We're asking those parents to choose one address, maybe another family member that resides in the school boundary or something, an area where mom on her days can pick up the student, dad on his days can pick up the student, that the parents can agree to. Because right now we are literally, like I said earlier, dropping off students 2.5 days or 2 days here, 3 days there, and it is not something that we can adequately and safely track and maintain, knowing where our students at and where they're going. We will honor notes. Now, what we have going on, like on a Friday afternoon, we have, let's say at the middle school level, we've got, let's say Cheyenne wants to go to Anna's house and the parents agree. As long as Cheyenne has a parent note that can present to the driver that day and it's signed by Cheyenne's mother, then we will go ahead and drop off at Anna's house because we've got documentation from that parent or guardian. So we're still going to work with those situations, but we're talking about day in and day out, common run of the day, one address is what we need to have in the system, and it does not have to be that home address, but it has to be an address in that school zone. Another thing that we're running up against is our zones, depending on where you live, you could have a parent live in the Rogersville boundary, but grandmother lives in Carter Valley boundary. So if that boundary address is outside of the boundary and those routes are tied to that school, we need them to choose an address that's within that zone, because our policy states that we will provide transportation within those zones to those zone schools.
And I think most of the, had never really thought about before we get my parents' house. I think at least the 4 calls that I've got is more that I need my kids to go to my mom's every day. You know,
That's, if it's every day, that's no problem.
And it's within, you know, the zone school, it's
Correct.
not, you know, there's no issues.
To rest assured those individuals that can still take place. We just need to make sure that grandmother's house in that example is the transportation address.
So if a parent, if they drop their children are picked up at their house every day, but one day a week or out of a month, if they find out they're going to have to go over, parents going to have to go over, they can send a note and say, hey, drop my child off at my mother's or their grandmother's or whatever, as long as they have a note.
The notes are for friends' visits, an existing stop that we're already making. If it's an added stop, we can't add a stop necessarily unless it happens to be next door or extenuating circumstances. That's where I'm saying there's wiggle room with individual circumstances. We're not saying across the board, no matter what, this is what it has to be. But in that example, Kathy, if the grandmother lives next door to the address, then no problem. But if it's outside the boundary, we probably cannot accommodate that because that then affects the other students that are on that bus that have drop-off times and locations already established. So good question.
In the event of an emergency, let's say I've got a first grader that gets dropped off at my address, but there's a medical emergency. I have a heart attack. My wife has to take me to the hospital. No one else is around. Does a parent have the ability to call and say, hey, nobody's going to be home. Can we have my child dropped off at Neighbor Joe's?
We've actually had that before. Kevin, I'll let you address that.
Yes, yeah, if they have a medical emergency, they can contact the school, and that's where the note can come in. And we would call, the bus stop would call and verify with the neighbor just to make sure that the reason is legit and valid. And so, yes, we have that.
The other thing I will tell you is in the event that that phone call can't be made, because there are circumstances we've dealt with before, that student stays on the bus and is brought back to the school until we can reach some sort of secondary contact or alternative.
Yes, at the bus stop, we always verify. So if we can't get a hold of anybody, then we do ask them to come back to the school. We've had them come back to the bus shop before and wait here with us until we can get somebody and in touch with somebody.
So there are some alternatives.
Yes, there are, and that's why there's no certain black and white issue when it comes to this. But what we're asking is that our stakeholders, our parents and guardians, work with us on identifying a transportation address within the school zone that they're zoned for. If that's different than the home address. If it's not different than the home address, then nothing changes.
Okay.
But we're asking for one transportation address so that we know where we're taking that student, barring any unforeseen or surprise circumstances, where we're taking that student, picking them up, and where we're taking them every day after school.
And is this based on our new software?
It's in conjunction with it. It really doesn't have anything to do with the software other than we want to make sure that when we're updating it year to year, that we have the correct information for each student. And that's why we're working on talking points this spring rather than waiting any longer to push that out for the fall to be prepared.
So the communication that's going out to parents, or parents that perhaps call your bus shop over this issue, is clearly communicated. It can be something other than home address, correct? Is that communicated effectively in what went out to parents?
We are trying to communicate. We're putting in information like Facebook now. We're doing all calls. The issue we have is when we have our Skyward's talking to our new software, and the issue is that it only pulls from the primary phone number. So if we have 2 phone numbers, it's only going to the one parent. So we're having issues with other parents that are separated. They're not getting a phone call as well. So if we can have one primary phone call to that parent, and the other parent can contact the other party. That's why we did the Facebook. So we're trying to communicate better. We put out the Facebook, we put out the website. Here at the Transportation Department, we're doing our best to communicate any changes. Again, I feel that we've had some positive things that's happened at the Transportation Department. We're still working on improving communication to the parents. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Matt, if you don't mind, could you forward us the communication that was sent to parents? Because and I'm not seeing that, which my kids are not bus drivers, so that's why I've not seen the communication about it. But it does seem to be that maybe either we didn't have an option in an alternative transportation address to begin with when we first tried to communicate. And did we add that?
Skyward up to this point we've never been able to identify a field that the routing software or our communication software could link to without the work done this year. So one of the primary field that Kevin's talking about, if you're a bus rider, that primary field will be the transportation address, the drop-off pickup, and then we're going to have a primary address field separate and apart from that for every student, whether they're a bus rider or not. That's the information that's on file for home address, for where the utility bills are going, where we send student records, all of that stuff. But then we're also, for bus riders, going to have a transportation field that could be different from the home address as long as that is in the zoned area for that school.
I mean, because just try to sit here and explain it kind of even sounds complicated. So I just want to make sure that the communication on that is very clear.
That's why we're starting early. No changes have been made. Just to reiterate, we've not made any changes right now. What we're doing is we're setting up communication for streamlined changes for going into next year. So we're starting nice and early. But yes, I can send a copy of that. It's on the Facebook page for transportation and it's on our website for transportation, but I'll copy that and send it to you.
One suggestion, Mr. Cobb, maybe during the course of this school year, we could set up some small community meetings if people have questions.
What we have, we can do that. What we have found is that if we can get a video out and have the schools relay that, or get it on the website, Kevin explains it, or better yet, we have some students that do it because we've got the broadcasting program that volunteer. They're willing to help us with those types of things, and we are looking at utilizing different media to communicate.
Well, just however.
Yeah, and we're open to that. What we wanted to have in place first is clarifying information in writing.
Yeah.
That we can refer to first.
Well, just as long as we can get everything straight by the end of the school year or before July whatever, before school starts.
And if I may, I would like to.
Make sure too that the software is working for us and we're not working for the software.
Yes, I would like to invite the board to come and meet with the route specialist and myself and Mr. Hickson and sit down and just look at the software and see. Because I do think it's beneficial, it's been helpful, and it's been something that was needed. So I would like to invite the board to come and we can sit down together and look at it.
And the software definitely supports what we want. And as I communicated at the start of the year, we did not have certain safety mechanisms in place that we do now with the software. We know when the target time for pickup is, when the target drop-off time is, what route they're running, and what driver they've got assigned to those routes with the roster of students that are on that bus. That's something that, short of a piece of paper, when Roy was working with us, that we struggled with. And I think Roy did an extraordinary job in tracking via spreadsheets and paper and a map that was on the board. But that process of digitizing that Roy started before he left and subsequently became a board member and Kevin took on from that point has allowed us to digitize our maps, to create district boundaries that are visible to parents, and when they're moving into the area, they know what boundary they're in based on the transportation map, something we've never really had before. They can pull up their address and it will tell them what school they're zoned for, what bus route they possibly would be part of. And our data clerks and our office support at each school site are gradually getting more and more feel for that. It's been a lengthy, tough process. It's the top rated software for routing, but it's one of the most difficult to learn and to implement, especially, and they'll tell us this, especially in a rural system where there's really no 90-degree roads and corners and intersections. There's no north and south straight roads to speak of other than the 11W that runs diagonally through the county. So building that and utilizing systems that are supposed to be hybrid between a metropolitan and a rural system, but we're really using it for a predominantly rural system, has been a huge learning curve. But I will say, safety-wise and our ability to track the data and to make route changes or affect routes, if we get 4 or 5 students that move into a certain area or that leave a certain area, those types of things are coming along very, very quickly, and the software is supporting our need to be able to tell anybody, particularly our parents, where their children are at any point during the transportation process.
I read an article the other day. It's a school system, I think it was Roanoke, spent $70 million on their buses. $70 million. But now that's going to cover like 6, 7, 8 years. But, you know, it said, I think vaguely remember it, that parents have the ability to track where the bus is exactly in case it's a rainy day or a snowy day, and the kids don't have to stand out in the rain or something. You know, that's $70 million. That's a lot of money. And they got all new buses and all that. Just put it down.
To that end, safety, and this speaks, I know, and I don't want to leave that question and that comment and take it for granted. We will follow up with the adequate communication and making sure that that's conveyed properly, and including any meeting that you think we all need to have. But I would invite you to come down here some afternoon and look at the routing software, meet with Autumn and Kevin, ask any questions. You can pull routes up that are in your area that you may be familiar with, roads that you're familiar with, even your own address, and we can show you what the software can do safety-wise. I will add that Kevin was able to not purchase any buses this year, take a break from purchasing buses. That may put us a little bit behind on our 3 or 4 per year, but we've got wiggle room in when our next round of buses expire or have to come off the road. So he was able to save that money. And what he did there was repurpose that purchase, the bus purchase, for upgrading our camera systems. Our camera systems are based on hard disks located on each bus right now. And if you need to pull information, pull recordings, you have to actually go on each bus and pull that hard disk off, find the segment of video after you've synced it or linked it to your computer at your desktop, find it, save it, and it's a very lengthy process. The new cameras coming in are digital. They require less memory. We can record far greater data with it, and it's very, very detailed in its recording, so in its nature. So we were able to repurpose the purchase monies from those buses toward the cameras, and that's another safety feature we're making this year that should greatly help us out in future years.
You know, touring the bus shop with the new technology is no different than going into a school and looking at the classrooms. So if we could get that on a schedule sometime.